Well, S&P is just another ratings agency that has given South Africa yet another economic lifeline here.
Absolutely. So, as you know, Fitch is still outstanding, and Moody's was supposed to come out straight after the budget, but we still haven't seen a full credit update from Moody's.
Essentially, what we're looking at here is a story that hasn't changed much, or at least as much as rating agencies were hoping at this stage. Much was made of the change of government in this past February. Cyril Ramaphosa coming in as president, seen as a solid hand at the tiller from an economic point of view. Why are we still lagging, though?
So the greatest thing that you need to realize is they look at a full spectrum of things. They don't look at one thing. So when they came out yesterday, S&P talked about how obviously they would revise our rating should they see economic growth actually ticking up much more than what is in their model. And that's the 0.7% that you stated. And also they've talked about debt stabilization and having to see a different picture in terms of us actually reining in our spending. That would go a long way. It's also a peer relative analysis. So our peers are actually way ahead of us, and we're not looking as attractive. So that's also something they look at. They look at institutional stability, so our institutions and how strong they are. And they did mention that monetary policy still remains strong, and the fiscal policy is decent. So these are things that they would look at.
But certainly what also underlines all of this is certainty. Certainty in the institutions, certainty in society, and most definitely certainty in policy.
Yes.
A couple of months away from an election, we can't solidly say that policy will remain unchanged for the foreseeable future, can we?
Absolutely. So that's another thing where it's actually a good thing that they've remained on hold and with a stable outlook, giving us a bit of room for us to get to elections, and then they can reassess to see, number one, what composition of government comes in, because they always talk about it's not an individual thing. It's not about one person. It's about the collective and how strong that collective is. So I think we are getting that room, and the Ministry of Finance actually responded to the rating outcome, saying that they're happy for the room for us to actually have time to implement policies.
Ms. Atindi Matika, am I the only one here that feels as though the economic axe has been hanging over South Africa's head for the better part of a decade? The ratings agencies have, for at least the past 5 years, not had a very rosy picture to paint for South Africa's economy, and this doesn't look as though it's going to change anytime soon.
That is accurate. And it's also about debt to GDP. So when you look at those metrics, we've actually been in deterioration for the past decade. And these are the sorts of things that we need to actually start seeing shifting. And we all talk about how it's a structural thing. So we actually need to start seeing those structural issues being cleared out of the way.
Well, then bring us into your confidence then. What's, in simple terms, the reforms that we need to undertake, the structural reforms that South Africa's economy is going to regard as vital moving forward if we're going to turn things around?
The top one right now is land. So without land rights and without assurance on how your property rights are safe, for an investor, that's going to be an issue. So I think the top one right now is land. The mining charter has been resolved, so that was one that for years we talked about. Another one is your labor. So we actually need for labor and labor policy to make it easier for businesses not only to invest, but also know how to proceed once they hire a whole lot of people and they now need to maybe retrench. So they need for those things to be a bit more easier for you to do business in the country, for investors to come through.
How does South Africa handle the land question without broaching the subject of expropriation without compensation, and doing it in such a way that Cyril Ramaphosa has said won't affect the economy and won't affect food production? Quite a tightrope.
It's a tough one. I think that's a political landmine, and to be very honest, it will be interesting to see how government walks this very thin line.
Let's be honest, though, it's not only South Africa's economic woes that have resulted in slacking growth for this country. Global economic prospects have not been very good for emerging market economies, especially in the face of a more resurgent USA.
So it's one of those years where it started off very jubilant, and forecasts were very high, and we actually saw forecasts being push to the upside. And the year hasn't actually produced what we anticipated. And with the US and China issues, that's really played a big part in South Africa's story. Going into next year, it also becomes difficult where the global growth story is slowing down. So we are already in that, and now you're adding to the global story on our story. It makes it very tough.
Look into your financial crystal ball as we end this conversation. Best case scenario for South Africa in the next 6 months to a year?
So the president's policies that he's been putting in place, the stimulus packages, which some would term differently, the different things, the job summit, and what we've been seeing the president trying to push forward, we start seeing that coming through and actually seeing companies putting that money that they've pledged on the table and understanding how this opens up the economy. So that's what we're looking forward to.
And then, of course, worst case scenario, this axe that's been hanging over South Africa's head for the better part of a decade eventually falls. What happens then?
Well, the ratings agencies will probably downgrade us. So Moody's is the only one that still has us as investment grade, and that's the one that we're very worried about. Cost of funding goes up. Our debt to GDP metrics deteriorate further, so that's definitely
and of course,
not...
economic growth prospects also slack.
Also slack. So that's a picture we definitely hope will not come to light.
Well, we can hope and pray, and certainly hope that 2019 brings us further financial fortunes. Thank you very much, Tsitsi Hatende Matika, joining us on ENC.